Welcome back to Side Chat. This week we are going to cover German and a little bit of Italy armament for doing on our series. We're going to throw a little bit of technical data, a little bit of gameplay information, a little bit of history about each gun and plane that we can. There's a lot to cover. There's almost triple the amount of armament that there is from last week, so I brought Wildblueyonder in here to help, and this is not my area of expertise, but since he's a European, he might know a little bit more than I will and not have an American bias on everything.
Hello.
So let's start with factory your country, Italy.
Oh, thank you. So much appreciated.
Yeah. And we'll just kind of go through the same guns are in most of the planes. We'll just start with the MC202 because it has both of them. Was it how you pronounce it? Breda Safats, is that correct?
Breda Safat, exactly.
Well, I don't have that.
Basically, the main gun producer in Italy at that time.
And those guns were built under license from the Browning 1919s that I talked about last week, that were in the early Buffaloes and whatnot. It's the same gun that they took in Italy, and then they recalibrated it as they need it. So the first one, they took the Safats and they put the British 303 round in it, which is what you see in the what's it, like the G50, I believe.
Nope, actually, I don't think that.
Actually, that's a 50 cal.
All fighters have got 12.7s. The
so the
only one that also includes the 7.7s, which are, like you said,
fires
reach aim
303s off the wings. Okay. All right, so easy enough. So that's the only plane in game that fires the smaller rounds. I don't have much luck with these in game. With the, I never seem to hit anything with the wing guns. I have it set to universal, which is this tracer API. And then tracer is actually just pure tracer, which I don't know what the hell that's about.
To be honest, I can assure you of this. The belts in game are completely wrong and unhistorical for the Italian guns. They're completely messed up. And the 7.7s may not as well be there. It's pea shooters, really.
Yeah, I don't think I can ever actually credit a kill to those wing guns. So, like I said, when Italy gets their own tech tree, and maybe someday when all this stuff gets implemented, maybe they'll go back and historically correct that. The 12.7s are its own weird little gun too, which is, like I said, is in all of them. That's the same gun, they just recalibrated it, and it fires a 12.7 by 81, which is based off a British Vickers round. It's a little bit shorter than the US 50, and it fires at a lower velocity.
Indeed.
The only thing that's, I guess, really noticeable is the materials. We just put armor piercing and then incendiaries or tracers on ours. You guys put tried to put explosive charges in your 50s.
That's right.
If that's correct.
We actually had high explosives stuck in that fucking thing. We had 0.8 grams of PETN, and 1.3 grams of pretty much what is almost plastic explosive. Let's put it this way, almost. I mean, the chemical is pretty much very similar, and they did do damage after all.
Yeah, that's when those PETN is going to be brought up a lot, so give a real quick explanation. That's kind of the magic chemical in Simtex and C4 today. So it's the Germans and the Axis really love to use it. The other thing, I guess real quick to cover, it's one of those guns that seems to not hit register well in War Thunder. I've always stuck with the air targets belts.
Actually, if I may suggest, the new patch might be placebo effect, but I've noticed that the tracer belt, which is full API and works, does wonders under 300 meters. I mean, it pretty much almost instantly sets fuel tanks on fire, which is what it was designed to do after all.
Yeah, that's the only way to kill things, I think, in this plane is by fire.
Yep.
It's not the it doesn't have the punch of the other 50s in the game.
We had also a special round which was called Ramato Incamiciato, which was basically which had kind of copper jacket and had thermite in it. So yeah, it would be nice to have that as well, apart from high explosive.
And the other thing that's not in game is there's a Safat that fired 20 millimeter. I guess that'll be expected someday down the tech tree.
Well, when we'll
I'm not
start
even
to
sure
see
what
the
plane fired it.
Serie 5 fighters, pretty much. It will be pretty
there's
much
a lot
a
of
license-built MG15120. That's it.
Okay.
Really, really simple.
And then I guess from there we go to Germany.
Indeed.
There's two guns that I'll mention first. There's a lot of low caliber stuff. We won't spend too much time on that. There's two guns to notice on the turrets. One's the MG81 and the other one will be the MG17. MG81, it's actually in the back of the older Stukas, are actually the newer Stukas, that's the wrong way of saying it. It's basically a MG34 that was used on the ground by infantry that was put on an aircraft mount, and there's some other slight differences like no stock and whatnot. On the D3, you can see it's here in a twin mount where there's two of them together. Assume that's easier to use in the back of an airplane because you're actually using, what's it called? Those box mags versus, trying to load by belt.
Yeah, the operating of them was much easier respect on the ground. I mean, that's why the swilling mount, which basically means twin mount, since it was two of them, had an increase in firepower and was decent as a defensive armament for the first years of the war, at least.
High rate of fire, and it was very reliable. That's
Indeed.
I think why they probably moved to it.
That's
and then
why
the older
also
planes had the. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same concept of the MG42, buzzsaw.
Yeah.
A high rate of fire.
And then it's MG17, which is in the version what I have here is the JU87R2 on the screen. It's just a gun that was built just for aircraft, and it's the same caliber, but it fired about 200 to 400 rounds per minute slower. It was lighter, and I believe it was belt fit. It's hard to see in the game because it's not modeled in.
It's pretty much like the difference between an M2 Browning and an Army Navy M2 Browning. It's pretty much the same kind of idea there. Lighter barrel, higher fire rate.
And the MG17s were also, if I believe, I'm trying to find an early plane. They used in. Yeah, MG17s were used in the early HE-112s as actual forward-facing guns. Yep, and so did the early 109. So the MG17, the gun you see in the back of the Stuka here, was put in the wing mounts of the early German dogfighters.
Yep, that's true.
So, yep, in the nose. So it's just a lightweight, easy gun to install. So those are two MG17s in the front of the E3. The next gun that we actually want to jump up to would be the... And I guess real quick, we'll say this. What belts do you use for the 7.92 Germans?
The ones I've found most success with were stealth. Because not only did it allow me, to see my main armament better, so to speak, but the belt itself has got a good combo of... you don't have the tracer, which messes up the damage potential, and has got some AP rounds in it, which might not set on fire, but will knock some holes in the engines, wings, and will soften up the enemy.
The other school of thought, though, I hear players do is they use either tracers or the universal belts, and then they take their 20mm stealth. So all they see is the 7.92s, and then the 20mm is visible, and they just guide it in with the, basically,
I don't know why, but in my opinion, it doesn't make any sense, because different trajectories, so maybe you hit with the machine guns, but you're missing with the cannons.
That's, yeah, I prefer just... I have mine set to universal. I actually don't count these things for kills unless it's last ditch effort.
Yeah, I mean, It's only pretty much to scare people off, to maneuver, and that's about it.
If you want to kill these things, this is literally what I do: is you just get on their ass and then try to chew through their wing. That's about your best bet, I found. You'll never get through a fuselage with these little guns. That's my opinion, though. I'm sure somebody out there has, but...
Well, yeah, it was pretty much the same way. I mean, if I recall correctly, they were these guns were kept up until the 109 E7s fighting in North Africa as well. The pilots didn't started to feel that at that time they weren't really effective. Maybe beginning of the war, sure. As planes progressed, pretty much they didn't do anything.
And then trying to do this a little bit in terms of date introduction, but some of this stuff it's hard to do with Germany because they kind of seem to jump around with a lot of different
they also
installations
have
and stuff.
Existing designs.
And I just want to take a step back and go up to 20 millimeter. Try to do this by caliber and time, but take a step back to the 20 millimeter that's on the HE-112A-0. To my knowledge, it's the only airplane that ever had the... With my notes, the MGC-30L, which is basically a World War I anti-air cannon that was on a cart or on the back of a car or truck or whatnot, that they decided to mount to a HE-112. It's an absolutely massive gun that they shoved in this thing. Kind of baffled on how they did it. I think there was either 6 or 7 produced, 3 were sent to Japan, which is why you see a HE-112 premium plane in the game. The 87 HE-1 is the same thing as the HE-112
B0
A-0. Yeah, it's A0.
Well, yeah.
Actually, it's wrong. Well, that game must have got it wrong then. Okay, because it's the Japanese version of the game has the MGFF, so you're...
Yep, that's why I said the B0.
Okay. So is War Thunder going to put another HE-112 premium in the game?
Who knows? Magic. Maybe they will.
Well, anyway, this plane was...
Change
it. They might. I thought that's what they were going for. But anyway, this is a very high velocity 20 millimeter. It destroyed light tanks and armored cars in the Spanish Civil War. Kind of a limited production run, but this was kind of the predecessor to the first air-to-ground attack aircraft.
Yep, the DH-112 was also intended for interdiction, which basically needed air-to-ground.
If I can find the correct airplane in my tech tree.
You can do it, Bo.
I'm looking for the 13 millimeters. What plane?
The 13 millimeters, G10, G6, K4s, D9.
I'll flip a G6. So the Germans, as this part of the war, when they start getting to this caliber, everything they kind of did was out of desperation due to the Allied bombers. So you're going to see a lot of things that were just kind of... I hate to use this. I have nothing but respect for German gunsmiths over time. They've always made very reliable, innovative designs, but you're kind of start seeing where they had to take existing designs and retrofit it to do jobs that it wasn't meant to do. And this plane, the G6, is one of the planes that has what's called a MG131 13 millimeter, which will become the MG151 20 millimeter. So it's essentially the exact same gun. Find my notes here. So the 13 millimeter is essentially, to translate it to American caliber, is a 51 caliber. It's slightly bigger than the 12.7, of course, by 0.3 millimeters. So if you go by metric, which makes sense to you, but I've done calibers my entire life. I can do both. So it's a 51 caliber, so slightly bigger. So the US 50, if a US 50 was trying to shot through this gun, it would basically explode. It seemed to be every country did their 50 caliber either up or down a size so that nobody else could use it. It was one of those guns.
I mean, like the Japanese
had a high rate of fire.
13.2. I mean, why? 13.2, seriously.
So the MG131s had a faster rate of fire typically for this gun. It had a 900 RPM typically rate. It's also the gun that's used on the rear of the ME410, which is remote controlled turret. And maybe you can help me out with this, because I was trying to do a little bit of research, and they used a electrically primed ammo with an electrical current through the gun to fire these at their high rate of fire on the ME410, which is why you see that crazy rate of fires, because there's actually no firing pin striking around. They're just cooking off due to an electric current. Is that the same thing that's in the G6s and G10s?
Pardon? Could you repeat that?
Is that the same thing that they use for the G6, G10? Is that electrical primed ammunition?
The guns were all electrically primed from starting from for the 1.9s from the G4 onwards. The guns started to be all electrically primed, so they achieved a faster rate of fire. And it's pretty much the same thing if you look with the wing cannons on the 190s, which were electrically synchronized, so the fire rate wasn't reduced that much as well.
That's a German thing, because that seems massively over complex from an American state of mind.
But
we like firing pins, mechanical.
Yes, but it eliminated the issues of convergence, and it allowed you to keep 90% of your original fire rate, which is quite damn high.
I understand. It's one of those things that this German intuitive. Oh my gosh, that
the master engineering.
Yeah, more efficient bullets.
Yeah, smart bullets.
So, but this is the 13mm didn't kind of fulfill its job, so they realized they wanted more 20mm. They needed bigger cannons to shoot down the Allied bombers.
May I add one last note on the 13mm? It was designed specifically for air-to-air purposes. It wasn't meant for air-to-ground. That's why it doesn't have that much of a initial muzzle velocity, mainly fire rate.
It was, well, I guess we could say it was fighter to fighter, right? Like, this wasn't meant to do. But when they had to attack bombers, that's when we're going to get to the point where everything, kind of from this point on, everything Germany did was was on defense, basically. Kill bombers and kill tanks.
From Big Week onwards, 44, yeah, that's what they had to do.
So, this gun, the MG... Let's see, we'll try to find a good plane to use for demonstration. The MG151, which would probably be a G2 Trop, is loaded with them. So the G2 Trop, MG151 is the same thing as MG131 in theory, but they had to do a lot of work to get these guns up to that caliber. The Germans decided that they want to go to a more explosive shell and don't worry about armor penetration or high velocity. Just start hitting things with PETN, as we mentioned earlier. So the gun had to.
A magical component.
The gun actually had
things go boom.
So they Actually, I'll explain this. They took the 20mm, and you'll see the 15mm shell had a lot of powder behind it, high velocity. They decided to actually keep the same gun, and so they rebuilt the 20mm shell that they had to fit inside of the MG151 by kind of they shortened the cartridge so that the original 20mm head they had would fit on there, so of course less powder to push the piece of lead out, so that's one reason it's low velocity. And then they changed out the barrels, but for the most part the MG151 is the same thing as MG131. There wasn't that much rework to do, just a new barrel, and then they made up the ammunition to go in there. So I have right here the What?
Ammo choices for those two guns?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna bring up. I have cannon pods on because I'm just a douche, but I always stick with air targets when it comes to anything that has to do with MG151s. I don't know if it's because I see air target and I just went, oh, that's easy. I know people use stealth.
I've heard some people use
I have
armored
great luck with
targets.
air targets. The
And
armor
also
target
for
belts make sense from the APHE, which is the PETN stuff.
Well, yeah, but if you look at the belt in real life, the APHE had to penetrate either 4 or 5 millimeters of armor before the fuse would explode. So against a fighter, let's put it this way, which skin is not that thick, it would just either go through or not explode at all. So while the Minengeschoss, which as you said were the air targets, which were filled with PETN, would explode, had a timed fuse that would explode right under the aircraft's skin, which was very thin, and would basically have the same effect of a firecracker in a closed hand.
Yep, real quick, I want to explain this too before. So yeah, PETN, and then the Germans did something at this point with the MG151, which I call mine rounds, but you pronounced it correct, and I'm not going to insult Germans by mispronouncing their language. So in America, we're allowed to only take one foreign language, and that's typically Spanish. The mine rounds, the typical way of putting explosive rounds in was to take a normal shell, and then you had, lead ball, and then you drilled into the lead ball and put your explosives into that, so it was still a heavy shelled round with just a little extra gift inside. The Germans decided to take high quality steel, make it really thin inner wall, and then fill the entire damn thing with explosives. So it was essentially an artillery shell hitting an aircraft versus a lead round with a little bit of explosives in it.
Yep. It was
a
really
much more
effective.
Devastating hit. So whenever you're looking at belts and you see that, in the brackets, oh God, I can't say that word. Bog, is that right?
the name with that weird B, which is the double S.
Yeah.
But we'll digress.
Yeah, you always want to select that. That was one of the most devastating things the Germans used in aerial combat. So, mine rounds are good.
For the 13
and then we're going to take 13 millimeters. Is there mine rounds for that?
No, not yet.
I thought the MG151 was the... Right, the MG151 I thought was the introduction of the mine rounds, was that caliber.
The mine rounds were basically introduced with the MGFF, which we'll treat later.
We're going to do that right next, so...
Oh, okay. Well, just one quick word. For the 13mm, the MG131, get stealth. Its API does a wonderful job.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yonder and I tested this a couple days ago, and would it take you almost your entire belts to shoot down a Tempest Mark V in a test environment with your air target belts, and
high explosive.
The Tempest still kept flying with 1,200 rounds into it.
Only 21 rounds were left out of 950 fired. So that's a lot.
And then stealth used what? Like, I'll let you say a number because you were shooting me.
Up in less than 100 rounds.
So there's
difference.
Almost like 1,000% combat efficiency right there if you use stealth belts with a 13mm. So that's a huge tip that we just discovered ourselves. So MG151s was the premier 20mm from this point moving on the war. You'll see that on literally everything. Take a step back, because this is one of those things where Germany kind of moved around a bit with their implementation stuff. You have the MGFF. And for those who know gun history, the MGFF is actually the Oerlikon FF, which was made by those people in Switzerland who sold guns to both sides of the war. The US, and I'll talk about what I know about the Oerlikon FF from US history, and then I guess I'll try to implement what I've read about German history. The US used them as deck guns on our carriers and destroyers. It was I've heard horror stories and I've heard success stories. It was a very intuitive gun that had a moving barrel. It has this huge spring. I'll put up a picture, maybe a video of it. Very complex gun, and it's a very dangerous gun because it would like to fire rounds when out of battery detonations, which is when the bullet is not in the breech, and so it could actually harm and maim your crew members. The second thing I know about it is that it had to use the 60 round box mags, and those are an absolute pain in the ass to load. And I've literally seen people today, when they try to use those same box mags, cover the entire damn round in Vaseline and then just dump Vaseline on everything because it's such a stiff. I mean, it's a huge caliber being shoved into a spring-loaded operation, so that gun just proved to be kind of a pain in the ass. But I've always kind of wondered why, since the U.S. was buying these, why didn't we put it in our aircraft? Because I kind of mentioned last week how our Hispano knockoffs were complete crap, and we could never really get them to work. Why didn't we use the Oerlikon FF in our aircraft? Well, the Germans did that, and that's what's called the MGFF. And they've had the same kind of problems from what I was reading. The gun is bigger and has low velocity just like the MG151, but the problems came into it with the box mag. It's too hard to try and shove in these 60, and I believe they eventually got them up to 120 round box mags on the 190s. But you can
90,
see
90 rounds.
Was it 90?
Yep.
Okay, 90 round mags. So you're still not looking at a whole lot of ammo. You need belt fed for aircraft guns. So the box mags were just not going to have it. They tried to use it to belt fed, but the gun still didn't feed properly. Blah blah. One of the problems with the MGFF, and I'm have it zoomed in here on my screen, you'll see a huge lump underneath the gun where they had to kind of, make an obtrusive piece of metal outside the wing, which creates drag. So it just, that's why they went with the MG151s over time, was just due to size and due to ammo capacity.
And also much better performance after all. I mean, it also had a higher mass velocity, higher fire rate. Just a better overall.
Yeah, it's reading like the MG151. When you read about it, you go, that doesn't look like a very safe design or smart. But you look at the success they had after it, and I can't really argue with the redesign of the MG131 to the 151. When you read about the MGFF, you go, holy cow! That's why they made the MG151, is they had to get rid of these things.
Yep, pretty much. But a noteworthy mention about the MG151, MGFF, would be that it was later rechambered and refit to fire the Minengeschoss round in the MGFF-M, which was, in my opinion at least, a much improved version.
And just to real quick put out there, the Oerlikons are still in service today on the decks of ships. It's insane. This gun is one of those guns that still hangs around. So what I just talked about being kind of a crappy gun, they're still made today. They're still in service and they still work today. So don't get the idea that Oerlikons are complete crap. I've heard stories like anything else. And then that does it for German 20mm, and then we move on to the, actually real quick, let's go with an ammo belt for the MGFFs. Once again, I use air target. I like air target ammo.
Well, yeah, with pretty much the normal MGFF. Wait, let me find a fighter that's got those. Okay, this one.
I'm looking at the E3 right now. Which one has the M?
I found that the HE or in the air targets is not really that good, because mainly they've got those fragmentation, incendiary, self-destroying, whatever, which don't do anything. But I found good success with stealth belts, which seem to have a flatter trajectory and higher damage.
So you're ditching out the FITs, which is a quarter of your rounds. And then Tracers is 50% FITs. Universal's a third, so the stealth is the only belt you can get away from the fragmentation rounds.
Yeah, that's pretty much why I use it.
Alright, that's kind of crappy, but yeah, I understand. Well, everybody complains about the E3's gun. Like, people will use the E1 over the E3 due to the 20mm just being ineffective. Hopefully that helps. I think the E3 is a real quick off topic, but I think the E3, my personal opinion, is one of the better 109s before they became heavier and heavier and heavier. I think it's a great dogfighter, and it just kind of sucks it was limited by the MGFFs. Then on to the 30mm, which there's two variations of this in the game. Let's go with my favorite plane if you watch the channel, DHS 129 B2.
Ziduk.
I think it's the best dogfighter in the game, but I'm really weird in the head, so whatever. What you see underneath it is a 30mm autocannon that was originally called the the Mark 101, which was on tanks. Which, if somebody playing ground forces, you'll see that they have the little Panzer IIs with the high rate of fire cannon on it. There should be, I don't think this is in ground forces yet, the Mark 101.
No, it's not.
Alright, well, it'll be coming sooner or later. So you'll see this variation of a gun on a tank. The 103 was originally designed to fit through the prop hub of a single engine fighter. Try not to laugh when I say this, because as you're looking at the picture of the duck, you can see there's no way in hell that thing's going in a single engine fighter. It was originally told to be anti-tank and anti-air gun. It was belt fed, and it was first attached to the actual HS-129, and then later it was put on the B6R3. There's some variants of the Junkers planes that aren't in the game yet that had it, and then it was put on the F8-190 as cannon pods. What's notable about this variation of the 30mm, it was primarily used as a anti-ground gun. It was extremely high velocity and extremely effective. So it was restricted to air-to-ground duties basically permanently, because there's no way in hell you're dogfighting with this heavy-ass cannon suspended underneath your aircraft.
Indeed. Well, technically, later in the war, they made an MK103M, which stands for Motor Cannone, which means motor cannon, basically firing through the propeller hub. But those never really came into service, so yeah.
And then I use the air target rounds because I go head on with every Bearcat that wants to.
Gotta share some love.
Which is API HEIT. That IT shell doesn't really seem to do a lot. If you want to kill tanks with it, you have to use armor targets, but APHE is the shell that does all the damage. The IT, once again, doesn't really do much. So 50% of your rounds are going to split tanks, the other half are just there to bounce off for the most part. It's kind of a unique cannon. Like I said, these were later put on the B6R3, which is why that thing is such a monster and kills anything it touches. These are really good 30mm. It has, I guess you'd call it a baby brother later that was put in to originally fill its role, called the Mark 108. Do I have the... Yep, I have the Mark 108s on the cannon pods on this plane. So the Mark 108 fulfilled the role of being able to be shoved into the prop hub, which is what you see on the G6 to G10. I believe the K4 has that too.
It does. It can
and then
only fit that one.
Yeah. And then basically almost every German jet fighter, the 262, the 163 has the Mark 108s in it. This gun was literally attached to everything it could after this point, and it was all to kill Allied bombers. So the Mark 108 is quite a bit different than a Mark 103, but essentially they took a Mark 103 in the shop and then made a lot of changes to it to make a Mark 108. It had almost double the rate of fire as the Mark 103. This is where I kind of scratch my head, and the shady things they did with the Mark 108 that seemed to work and not kill people. The reason why they wanted the 30mm, just some numbers I pulled up off the internet, is when they were trying to attack Allied bombers with 20mm, it would take almost 25 hits to down a B-17. Use the 30mm, 4 hits. And then if you hit a single engine fighter for 30mm, it's gone. So, I know people are going to immediately talk about how B-17s take a million hits in the game, and I understand it's a whole damage model thing. But in real life, 4 hits by 30mm should take down a B-17.
Also, in real life, there was no bugged hit detection, so rounds didn't
Yeah.
spark off.
The 30 millimeter that was basically thrown at these aircraft was full of the PETN that we keep mentioning. It was literally, think about it just as it was basically a hand grenade being thrown at an aircraft. I mean, these things are 3/4 the size of the, rounds we launch out of the U.S. out of our grenade launchers at low velocity. These were coming a lot faster with, about the same charge in it.
Well, yeah, just to give them an idea, there were two versions, the Ausführung A, Ausführung C. The first one had 85 grams of PETN. That's a lot, really. One-shotting single-engine fighters, pretty much.
The other part, and I'll give the Germans a little love here. The Germans and the Russians, and I'm not trying to start a war by saying whose country's guns are better than others, but the Germans and the Russians weren't typically known for efficiency at putting out mass-produced anything. The Germans always did a lot of engineering and a lot of handcrafting, and I will always value that. But in a time of war, the reason why America won was because, and the British, and don't even say British, nobody else did anything. America won the World War II. Was because of using stamp parts. Yeah, P-51 won America. Or sorry.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the Germans, I'll give them a little bit of credit here. The Mark 108 was 80% stamped parts, which I find amazing that they're able to build that type of complex cannon with just stamped out parts, which is why they were able to produce these things in such mass under such well, basically they were running out of resources and they're running out of factories at this point because they're all exploding. So being able to make something like this out of stamped parts was a huge, huge engineering deal. And then, so here's kind of the sketchiness of the Mark 108 I'll talk about. The stamp parts were also not as high quality as using the other ways of building a gun. So they had to keep reducing the charges of the ammo they put into it. That's why it was such a low velocity cannon. There was a fear of failure of the chamber due to the lower parts. And then they also used they cut down the moving parts by using something that I had to research called the Advanced Primer Ignition Blowback System instead of gas operation. Which meant that every time the round fired, it would slam back the bolt, and that's how it operated, was direct forces coming back, which is extremely, in my mind, dangerous. I know there's a Makarov handgun that operates the same way. But once you dial in, I guess, the amount of explosive, or the powder that sends out the charge, and get that velocity right, you're not going to blow up the gun either. But it's just not something you want to do from a gunsmithing aspect too much. Like I said, though, they were kind of on the desperate side of that part of the war.
I mean, they would have thrown rocks at B-17 if that was enough to down them, I think. So.
Yeah, so... But I've never, or maybe somebody has, I've never heard of a Mark 108 having a failure in a German aircraft either, though. I've done, tried to do some reading, but I've never read anything where it said, this gun was known for blowing up aircraft's prop hubs. So, good on them, it worked. It's definitely nothing the U.S. would have ventured down. And then let's get to the fun stuff. The first country to really use the bigger autocannons, the BK series, which you will see, this stuff was really ahead of its time. When you move, and there's going to be 3 calibers we're going to cover, 37, the 50, and the 75 millimeter.
75.
These were all basically taken either off of field artillery pieces or tanks that they decided to put on aircraft. And one of my favorite planes is the Ju-87G series. I won't call it G2 because we'll explain the difference in a second. This, the 37mm was coming off a BK-37, which is a 12-round autocannon. They decided to mount them onto the wings of Stukas, and they pinned back the air brakes, which is why this plane doesn't have any. Or actually, it's completely taking off in this case. The was extremely, from what I could read, it was extremely difficult to use, and they originally kind of abandoned this plan because only your really good, skilled pilots could get in low, hit a tank, and survive the whole ordeal. So it just wasn't combat efficient enough. But this is kind of, I like to say, the predecessor to the A-10, Warthog, and the other air-to-ground planes that have served since this aircraft. This was an idea that Germans had that was ahead of its time. Have any fun facts to mention yonder?
Well, I guess we can talk about Rudel, the top scoring Stuka ace. There were actually gun cams installed above the BKE 3.7.
Oh yeah, sure enough, you can see that it's even modeled in War Thunder. You can see the lens of the cameras on the guns.
So that the pilots could see, like in replay films, they could see where and what they hit. And there's some really good footage on the internet of Rudel just going around the Russian fields, going like, "Oh, hi there, T-34, boom." So it was really difficult to use, but if you give it to good pilots, they could make it work.
Yeah, it just couldn't be mass produced and kind of given to the new guys.
It was really
and the Stuka was being phased out kind of at this time too for the 190s and the other guys who filled this kind of role.
Yeah, the Stuka, a little bit off topic, but should have been phased out after the Spanish Civil War.
The British would have loved that.
Yeah.
So the two differences I could tell, and for some reason they had the same ammo counts, but from my understanding, the only difference between the G1 and G2, the G2, and I could be wrong, maybe you'll yell at me or somebody in the comments will yell at me. To my understanding, though, the G2 was a field mod only. To my knowledge, these planes kind of came out of the factory as a G1 or just a G series, and the G2, like I said, this is my knowledge, was just a larger magazine that they kind of field modded in.
Double the ammo load, correct. And this.
And again, though, it's both 24 rounds.
This was modeled in War Thunder up to, I think, last patch, because the G1, which was the standard factory model, only had 12. Now it's got 12.
Right,
24.
and now
don't ask me why.
24. They both have 24. So only the G2 is supposed to have 24, and it was just double the magazine. That's the only difference that I know of between each aircraft. And to my knowledge, it was just a field change. It wasn't a factory change.
It was mostly done in the squadrons down on the eastern front. That's where it was used most.
Then we have the 50mm, which is the BK50, or BK5 is the correct term, but it's just a 50mm. Pull up a guy who has that on him.
ME410 U4.
ME410s. The ME410 50mm was used to, wasn't, at least what I could see, was never used as an anti-ground cannon. It was an anti-bomber cannon.
Correct. It was developed to pretty much engage bombers at a safe distance out of gunner range.
Yeah. So the idea is that, as most of us have felt painfully in this game, the B-17's pew-pew lasers from, fucking attacking a Death Star. The 50mm could attack it from that range accurately. It was, I guess we'll call ultimately a failure. They only made 300 of these for aircraft. And the problem was that in the ME410 you'll see this really big telescopic sight on the cockpit, and you had to shoot through this telescopic sight with this big ass cannon. And the B-17, the gunners were actually pretty observant of when a ME410 is, off the horizon trying to line up a shot. So they just call to the front of the plane, just start turning side to side, and of course you have such a small window to hit a plane that now the B-17 is bouncing in and out of your sight, and it just wasn't effective.
Yeah, it's pretty much, you have to be a sniper 360 YOLO no scope with this plane.
Yeah, so like I said, this is more of a desperation move that the 50mm has put on aircraft.
And as a side note, this was fitted to an ME-262.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Thank you for reminding me. The ME-262 that had the BK5 on it was kind of canceled because every time they tried to fire at night, the pilot was blind from the muzzle flash.
Yep.
And I'll put up a picture of that too. Uh, but
Desperation.
that's like
That's the only way.
yeah, yeah. God bless the pilots who tried that, because man, that's rough. So then we go on to the biggest can they had, which we'll go to another variant of the Duck, which I have zero luck with in this game. The 75mm. God, that's a big gun. This was a anti. This is essentially a Pac 40 anti-tank gun that they strapped to bomb an aircraft. I can't even say this stuff without laughing. It was a lighter version of it though, and it was. It could blow up any tank the Allies. Oh, there goes Yonder, Italy Internet. I'll get him back hopefully in a minute. But this thing was used to take down any Allied tank that we could throw at it. And then, real quick, we will move to the 190s. We're going to move to rockets, and we'll wrap this up shortly. Do a little bit of history, not necessarily gameplay. So you'll see on the 190s, there is rockets that go on here. Little tubes right here. These guys were not designed to be used to take down ground targets like the US did. I talked about last week how we blew up ships, infantry, tanks with our rockets. The Germans used the rockets as an anti-air tool. The A5s had problems taking down. Oh, let me get him back in here. Okay, so the A5 had its rockets. We're talking about rockets now for Germany. The BR-21 rockets that are found in the 190 A5 was meant as an air-to-air weapon. It was almost impossible to hit anything, but when you take a bunch of A5s looking at a bunch of B-17s in a combat box formation, you fire these rockets at them to break up the B-17's flight paths so that they break out of the box, and then you can kind of hunt them down like, lions do antelope.
It was the Germans for this purpose also used bombs. Yes, they basically dropped bombs on top of airplanes.
So, like I said, couldn't call this a huge success, but like I said, it was kind of an out of desperation thing. There's the R4M rockets that you'll see too, and these are on the 262s, I believe.
Yes, the 262s could mount battery of those, which
I don't have that unlocked.
Yeah, it could be fired all in a single salvo, or I think in pairs, in groups of 6.
And just to bring up, these things had the Mark 108s were actually so low velocity that the R4M rockets and them were used the same site because they flew the same trajectory. So kind of that big ass arc.
Yeah, they could use the Ravi gun sight, which was the gun sight used by German planes, because they had pretty much the same trajectory under 1 kilometer. So they could use that to guide their rockets pretty much.
And I think that about does it for us, unless there's anything else you can think of off the top of the head that we kind of skipped over.
Well, there are some consideration to be made about the damage model, because that's not perfect. I mean, it's not the gun's fault, and also the damage of some guns, like the Minengeschoss, at times I don't feel they do as much, but that's not a problem of the gun itself or the hit detection. Can't do anything about that.
Yeah, the frustration that comes from the big German players is the Mark 108s. It's always either being nerfed or buffed or doesn't hit detect or
marshmallow shooter, whatever.
And I put that video earlier this week, kind of the Die Bombers video, just for some fun, just to kind of show you can see how the F8's 30mm snap off. You see fires and wings snapping off with small amounts of fire. You see the Duck take down B-17s. You see the B6R3 take down B-17s. And then the opening scene, I have a G6 with the 30mm, and it takes literally every freaking round to take down a B-17 with the Mark 108. It shouldn't be that way.
Something is wrong. Yep.
Yeah, so don't give up hope on the Mark 108. Hopefully someday, guys, you can kind of get it sorted out where it is working as intended, and then the reign of Allied bombers will end.
Historically accurate, comrade.
Well, Russia's next week.
Oh, I see.
So, like I said, if you guys have any comments, is there anything that you don't agree with what we said, or any technical data you want to list, go ahead and put down in the comments.
Boy is always right.
Well, I'm not always right. This is stuff I'm always learning. I just knew Germans used cannons before I started playing War Thunder. I didn't know the difference between MGFF and the MG151s. To me, I just thought Germans used the same 20mm. And I know to a lot of newer players, you look at the German tree and it's like, oh, look at all the cannons they have, but why do some suck and why do some excel? And I hope this kind of brought up some points and a little bit of history so that people can understand what to look at and what to stay away from. And MG151s and MK103s and MK108s is where the money's at. Well, not Mark 108 right now, but hopefully in the future. Once again, I'd like to thank Yonder for taking the time to be here.
Anytime. Always a pleasure.
Yep. Like I said, you helped us with the flight models, you helped us with the aircraft, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future.
I would really
Until
love
next
it.
week. Well, I love you. Well, let's not make this weird. Let's get off the podcast before we make this weird. Alright. Have a good week. We'll catch you next time.